It's been a while since I've uploaded a video to YouTube, caught up with work, and then went and traveled with my business partner who then caught COVID, and then I thought I had COVID, and then I had to quarantine, and it was just a disaster. But I'm back now, and I'm back with something that I think is very relevant to at least most of my viewers and a lot of viewers on YouTube, and that is to talk about the PPP Round 2. For those of you that don't know what PPP stands for, it is the Paycheck Protection Program offered by the Small Business Administration, or SBA. We like to use a lot of acronyms out here in the finance world or accounting world. To give a little bit of a recap on PPP Round 1 for the Paycheck Protection Program, it was essentially if you were a sole proprietor or a small business, you could qualify for up to 2.5 months your average monthly payroll. So for example, somebody having $100,000 of payroll expense per month, they would qualify for $250,000 of PPP money, which was technically a loan, but if you use that money on payroll to pay your employees during these hard times through COVID, that money could be forgiven. And not only could you spend the money on payroll, but you could spend the money on rent, mortgage interest, so maybe if you carried a note on the building, and some other operational costs as well. So it was really helpful, and now they've come back with a round 2. Let's talk about how you qualify for PPP Round 2. First step is you have to have 300 or fewer employees. So hopefully for most of you that won't be an issue, but some of you maybe mid to large size businesses might run into a snag with this. Next is you had to have suffered a 25% or greater loss in revenue for Q1, 2, or 3 in comparison to Q1, 2, or 3 of 2019. So really quick, let me draw that out. What that looks like is you have Q1, Q2, and then you have Q3, and then you have 2019, and then you have 2020. And what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna take this number from 2019 for all 3 of these quarters, and then you're gonna take this number here, and you're gonna compare them. And if you have a greater than 25% decrease in any one of these quarters, then you're gonna qualify for what you need to on that step, which is a loss of 25% or more in gross receipts for Q1, 2, or 3 compared to the same quarter in 2019. Final step is if you got money from the first round of PPP, you had to have already used that money or are planning to use that money. So let me tell you, if you haven't used that money, have a plan to use that money. Let's recap how much money you can get. First is you can't get anything more than $2 million. So again, depending on what your average monthly payroll is, which you would be a pretty large size business if you were to hit this threshold, but you have to get a loan or you're able to get a loan for only $2 million or less. Now, same as PPP 1, if you're a non-restaurant business, you're gonna get 2.5 times average monthly payroll. So let's talk about the 2 quick ways that you can do this. If you're a sole proprietor and you file a Schedule C, which is just a form on your individual tax return, you're gonna take whatever net income is, divide by 12 times 2.5, and that ideally is the amount that you're gonna get for you. Scenario 2, let's say you run a small business and maybe you yourself are an employee of the business and you have employees in that business. You're gonna take the total amount of money you spent on payroll for the year, divide by 12 times 2.5, and that is how you will calculate your average monthly payroll. But there's a bonus if you're in the restaurant industry. The restaurant industry gets 3.5 times monthly payroll. So as you can see, they're giving an extra benefit here for people that are in the restaurant business because as you can see, they probably got hit the hardest. Next, let's talk about what you can use the money for. I know we talked about it a little bit at the beginning, but let's run over the details real quick. You must use at least 60% of the money towards payroll to be able to achieve 100% of forgiveness. So let me repeat that. You must use at least 60% of the money on payroll to be able to achieve 100% of forgiveness. So essentially, 60% of the money has to go towards payroll if you want this thing forgiven and completely be tax-free. So there's other categories that you can spend the money on other than just payroll, and let's go over these real quick. There's rent, interest on mortgage obligations, utilities, operations expenditures, property damage, supplier cost, and worker protection. Some of those are pretty self-explanatory, but the ones that we'll go over real quick are operations expenditures, supplier costs, and then worker protection. That's like additional COVID costs, like maybe if you had to pay an extra cleaning person once a week or once a month, or if you had to buy like any PPE material, stuff like that. But operations expenditures and supplier costs can get a little confusing. And what I would focus on there is money that you had to spend that was ordinary and necessary for your type of business. So it was ordinary, as if it's not an odd expense for your kind of business to have. And two, it was necessary. So you weren't just frivolously spending money, you needed to spend that money to, again, buy for something that you need to maybe resell or something that you need to run your business. Now let's talk about one big piece of this that was a mess with the first PPP program. Initially, when they issued PPP funds, this whole program was meant to be tax-free money to people or borrowers, and it was meant to be tax deductible as well. So if I got $10,000, one, I should have been able to have that money be forgiven, which means free to me. And two, I should have been able to write those costs off on my tax return. But long story short, the way that the law was written and what they intended did not mesh well. And the IRS said, no, no, no. The way that the law is written, you cannot write these off as expenses. They've now cleared that up. So this money, not only could it be tax-free, but you get to write off these expenses as well. So the deadline to apply for this, for PPP Round 2, is March 31st, 2021. If you got PPP money the first time around, I would recommend going to that same bank that you worked with the first time. If the bank that you worked with the first time was a headache, find a new bank. I would recommend finding more of a smaller regional bank, even a credit union possibly, but I would not go to a large national bank, as I've just seen people who go there have more headache. There's more red tape to jump through, the process is longer, you're usually speaking with someone lower on the totem pole, whereas if you get in with like a credit union or more of a regional sized bank, you can maybe speak to a manager or something like that, and they'll be much quicker to help you out. I've seen funds get dispersed much faster from smaller banks than bigger banks. Last thing, let's talk about how long you have to use the money. Originally with PPP 1, you had two covered periods. You had an 8-week and a 24-week. Who's not gonna select the 24 weeks? So with 24 weeks, that gives you 6 months to spend the money. Some tips I can give you from dealing with clients going through round 1 and now going through round 2. Number 1, find a smaller bank. Don't go through a large national bank. 2, have your financials ready. Because these loan amounts are calculated based on your numbers, you have to, 1, have them very accurate, and 2, have them available. Think about it. Your deadline is March 31st. That can come up very quick if your financials aren't ready and you're going back digging through receipts trying to calculate what your numbers were. So I can say start working on that now, especially if you plan on applying for round 2, because your application, you're gonna have to have those numbers available so you can come to what your loan amount should be. And another tip, make sure you're documenting what you spend the money on. So if you spent it on payroll, make sure you keep those payroll records. If you paid a couple rent bills, make sure you keep those rent invoices or a copy of the check that you wrote or whatever that may be. Just make sure you're keeping good records for where the money's going. I actually recommend setting up a separate account to store these funds in. So let's say you've gone through the application process and you're approved for, let's say, 20 grand. Maybe set up a different checking account under your business and get that 20 grand in there, and now spend that money from that account to where now you know you can always go back to that account, pull the statements, and all of that activity was just for those PPP funds. You won't have to worry about intermingling things with your other company accounts, and the record keeping can stay a lot cleaner. Overall, I know that was a lot to take in, but this is a huge benefit for small business owners. I mean, essentially, this is tax-free money, and even better, it's tax-free money to you and you get the expense for it. So I would recommend anybody who's running a self-employed business who meets these qualifications, which again, fewer than 300 employees, you've suffered a 25% or more loss in gross revenue. Really quick, let's go over what gross receipts means, or gross revenue, as far as this deduction of 25% goes. So this is not where you go back and calculate what your income and expenses were for that time period. It just means income. Let's draw this out real quick. So typically what you're used to seeing is you have your gross revenue, and then you have your expenses, and then from there you have your net income, okay? So these are expenses. So like you make 10 bucks, you spend 2, your net income is 8. In regards to this calculation, for what you have to do is they just want gross income. So again, you're gonna get Q1, 2, 3 for 2019 and 2020, and you're gonna calculate what gross revenue is. That's all I care about. So you're gonna get gross income for Q1, Q2, Q3, same ones over here, and then you're gonna compare them. And again, if you have a greater than 25%, greater than or equal to 25% loss, you will satisfy that test. I hope this helps some of you small business owners or independent contractors. This is a huge benefit if, again, you are self-employed, and this could really help your business thrive through a hard time. I mean, or this could have been a great time for your business and you don't qualify for these, and maybe you just absolutely crushed it in 2020, but it's worth the chance to go through and run the numbers, see if you qualify. And most of you, I think, will know right off the bat, like, hey, I had a really tough year in my business. And so, like I said, find a smaller bank to go apply with. If you need help from an accountant, obviously we're here to help. Find an accountant to help you compile your numbers, or if you feel confident doing them yourself, do them yourself. But the first thing I would do is get your numbers ready, find a bank you can apply with, and get started. Your deadline is March 31st.